Today's episode is brought to you by HERdacity. HERdacity is a nonprofit inspiring confidence in women to achieve their professional goals. For resources, networking opportunities, and a strong community of women, visit HERdacity.org to learn more.
Welcome to HERdacious, a podcast for audacious women. Welcome, Earthlings, to HERdacious, the podcast for audacious women seeking to level up in their careers and looking for some femme support on that journey. I'm your host, Lorelei, and I am pleased that you tuned in today. By the time you hear this episode, the past weekend will have been the July 4th holiday here in America. And with the rapid increase in COVID cases around the country, we decided to do a throwback episode from our limited repertoire to inspire and to remind you how each of us can make a difference in our communities and in our place of work. For those of you who don't know, this podcast is a product of Austin-based nonprofit HERdacity, where our mission is to inspire confidence in women to achieve their professional goals. We want to ensure that our community knows and understands our core values as an organization and as a group of people who work in support of that mission. These values are behind all of our work, our content, and our intent. And those values include confidence, integrity, diversity, inclusion, and choice. While our values come into play in many of the facets of our work, diversity and inclusion are the ones at the forefront of the conversation right now, and we wanted to highlight our first ever podcast, which brings these issues front and center. During this episode, we speak with educator and consultant Sam Barrow about intersectionality and workplace bias for women and folks of color. Our goal is that you use the information we discuss in these episodes to personally and professionally develop yourself so that you can level up in the workplace and as an individual in this world. So, without further ado, let's get to our conversation of navigating bias like a boss with Sam Barrow. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Lorelei. Thank you for having me.
So we brought Sam in, who is going to share more about her experience, both personally and professionally, to give us some needed feedback and starting points for growth on intersectionality and workplace bias. So, Sam, let's just start with women of color, people of color, and talk about what that means, just to give us a baseline.
Yep. So when we talk about women of color, we are talking about people who are anything other than white, right? So that can get a little complicated when we think about ethnicity and where people have come from in their past. But generally, we're talking about Black and brown people. When we talk about women, especially when I talk about women, I also include gender minorities and trans women in that conversation.
So let's talk about the workplace. What types of challenges of workplace bias do women of color experience? And I see you smile.
So fun, Lorelei. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but the dreaded angry Black woman is one of those things that come up pretty often. So it's this idea of, am I too aggressive? Am I representing an entire race when we talk about how I act in the workplace, how I act in the environments that I'm in? There's also obviously expectations people might have about where you come from. So being educated. I worked at a company for 4 years and they were surprised that I had my bachelor's, but I'd known them for 4 years. I'm like, hey, it's okay, we're here. But just having to prove that you are educated, having to speak a very certain way, being gentle and being friendly and nurturing everyone's feelings. These are all things that you expect from women and women of color. And it can make it difficult to get ahead in the workplace because you're now managing and trying to meet a bunch of expectations around who you're supposed to be.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Meeting other people's expectations. Like, every person on the planet has to deal with that in a certain way, shape, or form, whether it's their family, their partner, the workplace, the community, their church, whatever it is.
Yep.
But it specifically just really hits home for specifically women of color in the workplace, meeting, let's call it white normative culture, because that's kind of what it is here in America. So what's the mindset, like, adjustment? Because people expect you to assimilate within the dominant culture.
I would say two ways that you see this is one in how we dress and we look, and the other one is how we act, how we talk. And so there's something called code switching, and it's where you go from what is normal in your culture to what is expected in the dominant culture. This is very common with Black people and the use of Ebonics or AAVE. Using the way that we talk at home in the workplace generally is not acceptable, whether or not it's professional. It is just seen as a Black thing to do. And then there's the other side of this where is my hair straight? Is my hair puffy? Is it natural? Is like this the right amount of clothing? Do I look too sexy or whatever it is based on my body type alone? There are just so many things that we're kind of thinking about, and it's putting on this visual facade and then this emotional one as well.
That must apply even more challengingly to those on the spectrum of gender identity.
Yep. So there's always the question, and again, by no means am I a representative of the trans community or speaking for them, but I have folks in my life where it is a constant struggle to be taken seriously. Whether it's pronouns, whether it's folks asking really personal questions that do not belong in anybody's mouth, it's challenging because now you have to fit into, what does a woman look like? What does a person look like? What do people expect from me? And especially for our friends that are non-binary, do you have to pick a side, or can you just come to work being the person that you are?
Gosh, yeah. And I know that women around the world are dealing with the general stereotype of what does a woman look like.
Yep.
But I love that we keep having conversations and moving the needle forward, regardless of ethnicity or country. So it's excellent. So there's a quote that you had mentioned beforehand that was really powerful to you. And it's, every time we have a chance to get ahead, they move the finish line.
Yep.
What is that? How
so
does that make you feel? What does that tell?
That's from Hidden Figures. I was watching that movie a couple of years ago, and I sat there and I went, holy crap, that's it. That's exactly what it is. And I say that because I've done a lot in my life. I have 3 degrees. I've got 10 to 15 years in my experience in my job field, and every time I go for something more, there's another hoop that I need to jump through. I've experienced situations where I had the most successful function in my entire company, for example. And so I've been in situations where I've performed really, really well compared to my peers and compared to the business in itself, and was still told, you need to show us more. You need to show me that you can do more. My resources were cut. I was underpaid, all sorts of things. And at the end of the day, my question is, what am I doing that everyone else isn't? What is it that other people can have that I don't have? And then you start to wonder, and you start to have those conversations of, is it me, or is there something else? Is there an underlying cause for the reason why I cannot be successful in this situation?
Do you get stuck in that way of thinking, that negative, like, ghost of maybe it's because I'm a person of color? And how
Absolutely.
does that, like, how do you have to intentionally pull yourself out of that way of thinking so that you can keep going forward positive, so you can keep succeeding in your role, so you can feel like you have the opportunity to make an impact in your job? Or does that just like push you down so hard that you're just like, I'm out, I'm done?
So it's a tough question, and this is another thing about just being a person of color, especially a woman of color. We are told that you just got to deal with it, right? So my mom named me Sam because she said it was a gender neutral name, and so people wouldn't know if I put Sam Barrow what my gender was. And because of the way I talk, I have a lot of people who assume that I'm a white woman, and so there are a lot of things that kind of get me in the door, and then I have to keep those things up from the day that I started a job until the day that I leave. And so I started to think, why? Why am I doing these things? Why am I tolerating these things? Why are these the things that come to me? And for a while, I was really concerned. I thought, okay, I'm just going to have to be the best Black woman that's out there because that's the job I need. And I realized that didn't make a difference because everybody who came after me had to fight the same fight. And so it moved from negative self-talk to being more of, what do I want? Who are the people I want to work with? What's the culture I want to build, and what's the culture I want to foster? And how do I get there? And I've had to leave companies because of it.
Mhm.
And I advocate for anyone, if you have the means to do so, take the time. Take the time off of work if you can, and really think about what it is you have to offer and how that's being used in the company or the place that you are, and even in your personal life.
Well, in regards to your personal life, do you still code switch?
Absolutely. Yes. So I'm a brown person who moved to Austin, Texas. I came from New York. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. So a lot of the conversations I have with my family are very different than what I would have with someone on the street. I know that I have to be politer than other people might be. I had a man approach me on the street and say, like, I'm not racist, bud. And I'm like, okay, so do I get to yell at him? Do I get to be angry? Do I get to say something? Or am I, again, the representation of my entire race? Because there are a few of us here, right? Austin is not predominantly people of color.
Right.
And so I'm constantly thinking about how I present to the people around me, because I know that people are wary of folks of color moving into their neighborhoods. People are wary of the attitudes that they might expect from a Black woman. And these are all things that are constantly running through my head everywhere I go, especially in places where there are less folks like me.
That's a hell of a burden.
It's what we do, though. I mean, and it's unfortunate, but it is the world that we live in. And for most folks of color, we start that way. We start from when we're very, very little. We understand that our world is going to be different, and we just have to hustle.
All right, let's talk about the different type of bias that we experience out in the world, whether it's gendered bias, ethnic bias, etc. Implicit versus explicit bias.
Yeah,
Tell me.
I think it's very interesting. Implicit bias is, I think, what we're seeing the most of right now. And it's why conversations get really difficult when we talk about discrimination in any form. And it's because the systems that we have built here are based on biases. And that's not to say that you are intentionally being bad, that you intentionally did something that was not good, but intent does not excuse what has actually happened. And so implicit bias is the concept of you're not being like racist, you're not being sexist, you're not openly saying like women don't belong here, right? That's explicit bias. But you might say we are looking for a man to run in this position because men are more successful in this role. And that's how your entire talent team has been sourcing. So there will never be a world in when a woman becomes a salesperson in your company because the systems that you have created have allowed that to happen. And again, it doesn't feel like you have done something wrong. It doesn't feel like you're excluding women. It's just we understand that we think men are more successful in this role.
So we use certain words like strong, aggressive, powerful.
Yep.
But yeah, so the implicit bias thing always gets me because it's systemic.
Yes.
And it started so long ago that none of us are really responsible for it, but we are accountable for its continuance.
Correct.
And I love having conversations about implicit bias and the systemic failures of our institutions to move forward quickly enough.
Yep.
And I can only imagine how frustrating that must be for people of color and women. I mean, obviously I get the whole women thing, but geez, it's rough out there.
It is. And it's also created an environment in which, I was just talking to your friend about this, where you're fighting for the same positions, right? So there will never be a woman of color who's a director and then another woman of color who's a director and a whole board of directors of women of color unless they start their own company, right? So I've had experiences where we only had one person of color in leadership. And so when that person left, it was a free-for-all. People wanted to know, how do I get there? What do I need to do? Who do I need to throw under the bus to get there?
Ooh.
And so it creates this false scarcity. And this is not only for women, but especially for people of color as well. You know that there are very few spots for you, and you know that you have to do so much better than so many other people to get that one spot, that we start to advocate for only ourselves in that space. And it creates a very hostile culture, and it makes it hard for us to move forward and to change anything.
And that's the goal of having these conversations. We want to emphasize that the scarcity is false. The scarcity is a garbage pail story that somebody's been telling us, and that there is plenty of space for multiple women and people of color at those executive, those C-suite positions, those board positions. We just need to fight for them and help our friends and our colleagues and our allies fight for them too.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons I started Learn, Grow, Expand, which is my online community. It's like free to join. I just want people to get together and talk about the experiences. I want people to understand that they have things that they can reach for, that there are paths they never thought about because they didn't know. That hasn't been open to them. Those options haven't been opened. And so it's really important for me for women of color to get together and tell their stories, to say, like, this is where I started and this is where I am, this is where I'm trying to go. And for us to really advocate and help each other because we have those experiences and we have those skills. And it's not doing me any harm to help someone get to their next step.
Okay. Well, on that note, let's take a brief moment for this sponsor break.
Hi, Barbie here from Moonray, husband and wife indie pop duo. If you enjoy the intro music, we invite you to listen to our debut EP, Honeymoon, streaming now on all platforms. Visit www.moonray-music.com for more.
Okay, and we're back. So, Sam, you told me about this amazing word, white fragility. I have to admit my ignorance of this term, and I would love for you to share with our listeners what it means.
Okay, so Robin DiAngelo wrote a book called White Fragility. I recommend every single human being reads it. It opened my eyes in ways that I did not understand. So I will say a Black person in America, but I am a West Indian person. My parents came from Guyana and Barbados. And our experience here is very different from folks who descended from the slaves who were brought to Africa many, 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 many years ago. That does not mean that we're not Black. It means that we have very different experiences.
Yes.
And that has helped me read that book, White Fragility, and go, this is why white people are scared to be called white. They don't understand that there are different experiences, that white is not the norm. It is not the everyday, and there are entire communities where we live and see different people. We live and see different cultures and languages and foods and things like that. But white fragility is this concept that if you call out whiteness, you're automatically calling out a white person. And so I understand that there are white people who grow up and never see a Black person until they are, let's say, in college. That's not a fault of your own. That's not a shortcoming of your own. That's where you grew up and where you are in America. But can you understand that your whole world is framed from the perspective of white is the normal? And so by default, to you, everyone is another. And this is the same thing for if you live in a male-dominated space, right? You're expecting men to be the workhorses. They're the people who take everything in the household and do all that work for you. And when you go out and you see women someplace else, when you see them in the workplace, when you see them doing things that you think are non-traditional,
Leading,
it's just
directing.
Yep, it changes. It comes across. It comes against something that you don't understand yet. And white fragility, again, just broke it down so wonderfully to allow me as a Black person to understand why white people have so much trouble understanding race and why talking about race is so difficult and feels confrontational. And I would recommend literally everyone read that book.
Okay. But having these conversations doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be educational. It can bring people together.
Yep.
How do we start having more of those conversations? I mean, do we start with the family? Do we start with our friends? Do we start with our neighbor?
It's a great question. I usually start with myself. So I start inside. I wonder, what is it that I'm feeling? Why do I feel this way? Where did that come from? You start asking yourself questions. Am I underselling myself because I think that women can't do this job? Do I know anybody else who's been this successful? Do I question myself because I'm not as confident in my ability to do the work, even though I have more experience, right? I start questioning why I'm having trouble. And then I start talking to people about it. And choosing who to talk to is difficult because it can feel confrontational, especially if you're not in a place where everyone's really open-minded. And so you can find communities online. You can start groups at your own company. There was an employee resource group. That's something that companies have, or you can start, but just really asking the people around you to think about these conversations. There's also the non-confrontational calling out of situations. So if someone says something that is potentially racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever it is, being able to call them out and say, hey, I trust that you didn't mean to do what you did, but here's the impact of what you've done. And I'd love to talk to you about how we can make sure that this isn't a problem going forward.
I love the way you framed that because you didn't make that person the bad, quote unquote, guy.
Yep.
The bad guy. Because we know by now in the political culture that we're in that shaming just doesn't work anymore.
Yep.
You can't just call them out and be like, hey, you're being a jerk right now. Do you know that what you just said was offensive?
Yep.
And they get defensive.
Yep.
They start, well, you misinterpreted me. You're misconstruing my words. You're taking that, whatever.
You're pulling the race card.
You're being too sensitive. You're
Yep.
being too feminine, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever garbage pail excuse they have.
Yep.
But facts don't always work either. Like you can show people the stats and be
Yep.
like, here's the institutional racism. Like here are all the bad things that continue to happen.
Yep.
We have the numbers to prove it. And people still can turn a blind eye, as we are literally seeing in real time.
Yep. So for marginalized groups, there's something called emotional labor. And this is for women, people of color, our LGBTQ plus communities. It's how much education are we responsible for? So as a Black woman, how much do I need to teach the people around me before I can tap out? And I didn't understand that line, my personal line, for quite some time. And so I was constantly trying to change people's minds and, hey, don't you want to talk about this? And I'm not playing devil's advocate anymore. I'm not going to allow you to do that. You can think what you need to think to get through your day, but I'm going to tell you how you're going to portray yourself in front of me. This is how you're going to interact with me, and we don't have to be friends. We just need to be cordial. So if that means that I tell you this does not sit with me, please do not make those kind of comments, I don't want to hear them again.
Boundaries.
Boundaries. You know, if you want to continue in your personal life to live this way, I've opened that door for you to explore why this is wrong. And if you choose not to explore it, it's not my job to educate you.
Okay. So let's keep talking about that, because boundary creation is a really great personal form of advocacy. It's protecting yourself.
Yep.
But it's also a development tool.
Yes.
That we are able to apply across all the spectrums of our life.
Yep.
So let's talk about other ways that we can advocate for ourselves moving forward, and then starting advocating for our colleagues.
Yes. So I tell this to everyone I know. I have a way that I introduce myself. When I meet a new person, especially in a work environment, I say, hi, my name is Sam. I am a direct communicator. I prefer to talk things out in the moment. I receive feedback better when it's a little bit later in the day, not immediately in the moment, so that we can get through what's happening here. But if you have any concerns, please let me know. Come talk to me. And if you feel like we're talking and it's getting passive aggressive, call me. Meet me for coffee, whatever that is. I want to tell you who I am, because after that, there's nothing that you can tell me otherwise. There's no other reason, right? So I'm a direct communicator. So if I call you out on something, I mean it, because I, one, have told you how this is going to go, and two, I assume your intent is good. I assume that you understand how I live my life and my days, and you understand that what you did was not okay, and we can move forward from that. And I use that in my personal life as well. This is who I am. This is why this hurt. This is why I didn't like this. This is why I would not like to see it again. And you start to create those boundaries so that you can preserve your true self. You can continue to be you everywhere that you go, instead of having to change a little bit here and there every new environment that you're in.
I like the idea of preserving your true self, but you also have to embrace it, right? So that goes back to what you're talking about, like getting to know yourself more, asking those intense questions, figuring out what you might be able to do personally, professionally to make adjustments, fill in weak spots in your communication style. I liked also how you have this upfront intro with people. How long did it take you to develop that, hey, my name is Sam and I do XYZ?
My goodness.
Don't take it personally. This is how you interact with me.
That took me about 10 years. One of the pieces of feedback that I kept getting was I was very aggressive, blunt, bold. And I'd go, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about it? And people couldn't quite tell me what it was. I wasn't cursing them out. I wasn't calling them names, but something about the way that they interacted with me, they didn't like. And so I had
You were too bold for people?
I was too bold. I look like I'm 13, so I'm not that threatening. But it really, there were people who were honestly scared to talk to me, scared of me. And I was like, what is it about me that makes you react that way? And so I did look inside. I was like, can I be nicer? Can I be friendlier? Do I want to smile more? I mean, I was in hospitality for 7 years. You don't get to be in hospitality if you can't smile. But I also didn't want to have to do that. I didn't want to have to change myself every time someone had a problem. And so I got to the point where I'd say, it's me. I'm like this. And if you have a problem, I am always open to your feedback. I always want to hear it.
What else can we do? Setting boundaries.
Yep.
I like the personal, professional intro thing. Hey, this is how I operate.
Yep.
What else?
So if we're talking about interpersonal, just telling people, calling them out, letting them know, giving them a warning, this is how this is going to go, and then escalating situations.
And I find those types of conversations to be really helpful when you frame them from the I, the my perspective.
Yep.
That made me feel like this. I heard it in this manner, because it keeps people from feeling defensive when you're trying to have those tough conversations. And when people are being open instead of defensive, they're more likely to buy into that conversation and to continue it later on.
I will caution that can backfire for women especially.
Oh, yeah.
Because it becomes very emotional, and it's easy to write that off as a woman being emotional. So I agree with you. I will say, to add to that, is facts. You said this at this time. I didn't appreciate it because it impacted me this way, or it reflected this way. And I try as best as I can to leave my feelings at the door and just very objectively, here's what happened. Here's why it was a problem for me. And if I can't objectively have this conversation, if I can't say why it bothered me, I need to evaluate myself first so I can go into that conversation, and there's no way that they can make me think I'm wrong or gaslight in any way.
Okay. What about when you're trying to call out people for microaggressing?
Oh gosh. This one is this one is a tough one because and I forgot who said it, but it's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, right?
Mhm.
Someone might say something not nice to you, a microaggression, like, oh, you speak really appropriately for a Black woman. I've gotten that before, right? Or, oh, you look like you could be something else. You can't be Black. There's just all of these tiny things that people say and they think they're compliments. And it's fighting that every single day. So ask them what they mean.
Mhm.
Tell me more. What do you think? What does that mean? Like, I had a conversation with someone about immigration. They're like, oh, but not your type of immigrant, right? Not your type of brown people. Tell me more. Why am I special? What did I succeed in doing? Why am I the unicorn? But questioning and making people explain those statements and letting them know why that is not appropriate to say to someone.
I like that. So how do allies come to the table to start supporting these types of conversations?
Yes. The thing I want to point out is that self-advocacy is not the same thing as every person for themselves.
Oh, yeah.
So that is, as we talked about, that false scarcity, that idea that there's only one place for me and it's the only way I can go, is how we end up in what's called performative allyship. So you'll say, I believe in rights for everyone. But when it comes down to it, when you have to make that decision behind closed doors, when you have to fight for people and no one else can see you,
Or go to the ballot box.
yes, when you have to actually put actions behind your words, are you doing that? Or is this just so you can feel good at the end of the day and still get to where you want to be? So I just want to caution folks against performative allyship. If you can't do it and feel good about it without showing everyone in the world, question why you're doing it. The second part to that then is advocating for yourself. So standing up when someone says something wrong to you, standing up when you're not given the raise or negotiated to the point that you'll be. Stand up when you know that you're underpaid. Stand up when you know you're being untreated or treated unfairly. All of those things then move to who else is in this situation? Who
Mhm.
else is experiencing this? If someone comes after you, if you just get fed up and leave, what's the experience for the people behind you? And I think about that every company I go to, every job that I have. I will fight for anybody around me. And there's no way where you get to treat people like others, because I know that if you'll other them, you'll other me. So we are fighting for each other. We're fighting for the same things. So you advocate for yourself, and then you look at how you can make the same change for the people around you.
Gosh, I love that. It's so powerful. Y'all, if y'all could see my face, I just got like crazy eyed real bad. Because I've lived through that experience as well. Because as a woman, you get to work in very unique work environments
Yep.
that aren't necessarily conducive to the things that the places that we operate the best in.
Yep.
And you have to wonder, all the people behind you, all the younger women, all
Yes.
the people of color, just if they're going to treat me like this, what are they doing to those other people?
Yes.
You know, if I have
absolutely.
these initials after my name, how are they treating everyone else? What the hell is wrong?
Yep.
And how do I make a change?
Yep.
And I mean, to be fair, I'm pretty bold and aggressive myself, and I'm never going to apologize for that. So I do get in trouble.
Yes.
Like, let's be real. We get in trouble, us audacious women. But I know that some of the things that I've done in my life, both personally and professionally, have made it better for the people coming after me.
Yep.
And God, that feels good.
I will
Just to
also
know.
say I've had two amazing managers in my life, and I cannot not shout them out. And it's Linda Hannes was one of my first bosses. I remember her name. I remember her clearly. I still play Words with Friends with her 10 years later.
Nice.
But she was my first manager in a corporate environment, and she made sure that I was rewarded for hard work. She made sure that I was protected from any office politics. She made sure that I was paid appropriately and that there were paths for me going from year 1 to year 4. And I cannot say enough about how much I appreciated someone taking the time and going, I know what it's going to be like for you. And I don't think that is going to be something that's going to hold you back. So here's how we're going to get you to that next step.
That's a real ally.
And then, yes, I had another manager, Ashley Rudolph, who was my manager for 3 years. And I learned so much from her, but I learned so much about myself from her. Just the fear of negotiating, for example, asking for more money for a job that I know I was doing well, the ability to take ownership of the work that I've done instead of saying, well, I got it done. It wasn't that bad. No, I kicked ass. And
Crushed it.
Yes, I did what I was supposed to. I exceeded my expectations, but I learned so much about confidence and understanding how to value myself from her. And so I have just 2 really fantastic people who took the time to be real allies and real mentors. And that made such a difference in my life.
It's lovely to know that you had those types of mentors. And I hope that for those of you who are listening and you have the opportunity to be an ally to a younger person who maybe needs that type of guidance, maybe a woman of color, and you might be able to help them navigate some of those waters that might be a little more choppy for them. Take the opportunity to be an ally, to be a mentor when you have the bandwidth for it, and when you have the inner wherewithal to give that sort of attention, that love to your folk or your sisters or whoever they are. We need those mentors to guide us through our lives.
Yes.
And they're not always going to look like us, but damn it if it's not so valuable and so important. We all have lessons that we can pass on to other generations, and it is our responsibility to do that and to do that well.
Yes,
So it's really exciting. So what are some more practical applications for people looking to be a better ally?
Yes. Education is always going to be the first place I start. You need to read everything you can possibly read. You need
Give me an
to-
example.
So again, White Fragility, but also Privilege, Power, and Difference by Alan G. Johnson. That also is just like, there's a list in there that's, if you are heterosexual, for example, you might experience these types of biases, but you will definitely not experience these other types of biases that a homosexual couple might experience. And he does that for all types of intersections. That
Ooh.
might be able-bodied, that might be person of color, gender, all of these spaces so that you can see where your privilege lies. Because for most of us, we have some level of privilege,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you are a white woman, you have a better chance at pretty much everything than a black woman. As a black woman, I have better odds than a Latina woman, for example. And so there's always work to be done, and education is that first one. It is not only about my story. It's not only about the world that I'm living in, but also how does that then impact the world around me? The second part to that is bringing yourself and being confident in who you are. So learning who you are, learning who you want to be, and being able to work towards that. So I do some coaching on like resumes and LinkedIn profiles and things like that. And one thing I have all of my clients do is a bio, 2 to 3 sentences. Write it down, and you tell me who you are and who you want to be.
Oh, talking about yourself is so difficult.
It is, but it's also the way that you figure out who you are.
And how you want to be seen.
And how you want to be seen, how you want to be known. What do people, what should they know and get from you when they meet you?
Mhm.
So I always do that 2 to 3 sentence bio. The next thing I get people to do is write out your skills. Who are you? Like, what do you do? What are you good at? And it's so interesting that women find it hard to really vocalize what they are good at. They
Mhm.
often, and this is scientifically proven, they're often giving credit to external factors. Oh, I was lucky. Oh, it just happened that way. And it's like, no, you busted your ass to get here and you did that work. And for some reason, you feel shame or shy about saying, I put the time in. I worked 45 hours a week. I did the work. And so being able to write down your skills, write down the things that you've accomplished and the things that you're good at, allows you to then negotiate in conversations, have those performance reviews where you can pull out those notes and say, yeah, this is what I did. And really take that ability for people to maybe say you're emotional or upset or aggressive and throw it away, because you know who you are now and you know what you're good at.
Well, each and every one of you out there is absolutely an amazing, powerful woman, and you have so many strengths within you. Shout them out. Don't be shy. Own all of those wonderful pieces of yourself. You are a confident badass, and you can do this.
Yep.
And you can help all the other women next to you do it as well. Because, together, I'd like to see them stop us. And that was Navigating Bias Like a Boss with Sam Barrow. In place of the closing fem fact for today's rerun, We brought Sam back for more conversation and to share some calls to action that we as citizens can implement immediately. Hello, Sam.
Thank you for having me back, Lorelei.
I'm proud to have you back, Sam.
I'm really excited to be here to talk a little bit about how allies can show up both in their personal and professional lives. The first thing I want to share is creating space. Listen to the communities you're advocating for. Speak up when marginalized people are being spoken over, and don't speak for them. I'd also like to shout out calling out the lack of diversity when you see it and hold decision makers accountable to fostering measurable change. Protect all marginalized groups, not just the ones you think are worthy. Even when a specific group is in the forefront, ensure that your advocacy is inclusive and intersectional. Take responsibility for your education in regards to racism, microaggressions, and privilege. Don't depend on free emotional labor. A good starting point is to join Rachel Cargill's The Great Unlearn. And finally, I recommend that you join virtual sessions hosted by social action groups like NAACP, Black Lives Matter, and Planned Parenthood. There's always more to learn, there's always more space to learn, and advocacy and allyship is a part of growth. So just keep in mind that you have the ability to foster change, and it is our duty as citizens to do so.
Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate you rejoining the conversation to keep us updated on actionable steps that we can take to foster change. It's so important.
Thanks, Lorelei.
And that's been our show for today. I'm Lorelei, and I was really happy that you chose to join us. If you liked our show, please subscribe and tell a friend. Until next time, keep making waves, fam. Together, we can make a difference.